Debate about liturgy in the church seems to follow such well-worn paths that it's hard to say anything new. But given what appears to be pretty credible rumors of a looming ban on the traditional Latin Mass in the Catholic Church, I thought I'd try to offer a new way of considering the situation in these well-worn debates in the form of a parable of the modern church. There was once a ministry of transportation whose sole responsibility was to draft and curate policies that would ensure the safe and efficient travel of its citizens. And over a long period of time, these policies and laws were developed and refined into what you might describe as the rules of the road. And this same ministry noticed that while the rules seem to be sound, there is a small minority of people who don't follow the rules set by this ministry. They operate outside those boundaries and are thought of as like separated travelers who are not unified with the rest of society in the observance of those rules. These people can be seen speeding, running red lights, jaywalking, and riding their bikes through fast food drive-thrus, which is totally not allowed. The ministry also came to believe that among those who diligently followed the rules, their law-abiding nature was actually just a mode of complacency rather than a true appreciation for the meaning of the rules. These people were just rule followers, but not true rule believers. And as such, they lacked a full participation in what it means to travel according to those rules. And so this lack of unity in observing the laws of transportation, it just becomes too much for the ministry to tolerate. And so out of a desire to achieve absolute harmony among travelers and to bring our separated travelers back within the boundaries of the law, they decide to completely overhaul the rules of the road in a way that it had never been done before. And so they draft an entirely new framework for the rules of the road without consulting the populace. But when the new rules are drafted and then rolled out and imposed, law-breaking, rupture, and separation from the law of the land reaches levels that have never been seen before. Those who formally follow the rules dramatically decrease in number and are instead added to the numbers of the separated travelers who don't operate within the law. Sometimes out of ignorance and confusion this happens, but also out of a rejection of the new rules, which are seen by many as inferior to the old rules. Some come to believe that the rules and laws are just arbitrary if they can be so willfully fabricated by the whims of the ministry. Others lose their trust in the belief that the ministry is an institution that is motivated by the welfare of drivers and travelers rather than some sort of ideological or political aspiration. And then there is a minority of people who, out of fear that the new rules actually endanger them and their families, they insist on following the old rules as if they were still in force. So after the new rules have been in use for some time, the ministry reconvenes to evaluate the success or the failure of their experiment, and they are forced to confront the fact that the unity among travelers that they had hoped for, not only does it not exist, but could be better described as chaos and confusion. Anarchy on the roads is seemingly everywhere, as everyone seems to be following their own novel interpretations of the new rules. And so pressure starts to grow on the ministry to fix the situation that they've apparently created. So after meeting to discuss how to address these problems, they decide that the best course of action is not to accept their own fault in the growing chaos, and it isn't to reform the new rules that they've implemented, nor is it to penalize those who are habitually breaking the new rules. Instead, they decide that they are going to single out anyone who is still trying to follow the old rules and blame them as the source for all this new and pervasive disunity. But the funny thing is, the followers of the old rules, they actually want unity too. They aren't trying to create disunity. They're not following the old rules for the sake of breaking or rupturing with everybody else. They see the old rules as the best way to retrieve unity. They look back at the time when the old rules were still in force, and they remember a unity and stability that far surpassed anything they've known since. They also remember the confidence that they had that their children would be able to safely move from one destination to the other without fear of being a victim of someone in the habit of breaking the law. Or worse, they didn't have to fear that their own children would join the ranks of the rule breakers, which is now a strong statistical likelihood. But these facts, they seem to be lost on the ministry. So they draft new rules that impose harsher penalties and disciplines on anyone following the old rules, while mostly ignoring those who are willfully breaking and ignoring the new rules in other ways. So, if unity and harmony is the fundamental aim of the ministry, which solution do you think makes the most sense? Harsher penalties for those following the old law out of a desire to recover the unity that used to exist, or a measured return to the old laws, which seemed to work much better? The Second Vatican Council called for liturgical reform. You can read about that in the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy called Sacrosanctum Concilium. But the reforms it called for were modest. It didn't say that the liturgy should be rewritten from the ground up. It didn't say that the entire Mass should be spoken in the vernacular. It didn't say that the propers should be replaced with hymns. It didn't say anything about the priest turning to face the people during the consecration. It didn't say that communion should be received in the hand or that the laity could receive the precious blood directly from the chalice. It didn't say that communion should be distributed by the laity or that high altars should be torn out. What did happen was that a small committee was convened in Rome to draft a new liturgy in the hopes that it would help complacent Catholics become more active in their participation, and simultaneously they saw an opportunity to make appeals to those who were separated from the law of prayer of the Catholic Church, those they called the separated brethren, by which they just meant Protestants or people of other faith traditions. And for the first time in the history of the Church, the liturgy was drafted as if it were a thing that we invented rather than inherited. The liturgy that had come down to us through the centuries is one that had developed organically and slowly over time. Pope Benedict XVI specifically, described the anticipated renewal of the liturgy and the disappointment with what actually arrived this way. He says, "What happened after the council was something else entirely. In the place of liturgy as the fruit of development came fabricated liturgy. We abandoned the organic, living process of growth and development over centuries and replaced it, as in a manufacturing process, with a fabrication, a banal, on-the-spot product." He also said, quote, "Anyone like myself who was moved by this perception in the time of the liturgical movement on the eve of the Second Vatican Council can only stand deeply sorrowing before the ruins of the very thing they were concerned for." And if you want to read some expanded thoughts around this sentiment by our late great Pope, you can take a look at his autobiography called Milestones, or more directly focused on the subject in his book, The Feast of Faith, Approaches to a Theology of the Liturgy. And so what was the effect of the new law of prayer that had been fabricated as Pope Benedict described? I would say chaos, liturgical abuse and novelty, an immediate collapse of religious and priestly vocations, a crisis of faith among Catholics, and a mass exodus of the formerly complacent. And in the midst of the chaos of that storm, a small minority of people clung to the only lifeline they knew that had been a stable source of the faith for them, but was now an eccentric and marginalized refuge. They continued to practice the old law of prayer, or the old traditional Latin Mass. And at one point, that same Pope Benedict pulled that lifeline back into the ark of the Church when he gave full permission for the Latin Mass to be practiced again. But more recently, out of supposed desire to address the ongoing crisis of disunity within the Church, our leaders have decided to double down on the new law and to scapegoat adherents of the old as instigators of disunity in the Church. And so, in the name of unity, we are seeing new restrictions on the Latin Mass, one that is rumored to be falling very shortly. But if unity is really our priority, then how can we reconcile such actions with that claim? How can we accept that authorities who refuse to crack down on rampant liturgical abuse and theological relativism, which we've all witnessed, is a problem that can be ignored, while people finding refuge in the communities that celebrate the old liturgy are really the ones that need chastisement? If we want unity and harmony in the Church, how can we ignore drawing inspiration from the law of prayer that had been in effect for countless generations and which contributed to a unity that has since been lost by its suppression? If we're really serious about renewal in the Church and a desire to remedy the crisis of faith and vocation, which I am, and from what I've seen, most people who go to the Latin Mass are, then we should be trying to harmonize ourselves with our great and timeless traditions, both creedal and liturgical. Now, I'm not someone who thinks that a wholesale return to the old liturgy is the antidote, as that would probably just bring more chaos to those acclimatized to the new liturgy. But I do think that the new needs to be reformed with much greater integration from the old into the new, and with a better appreciation for what the Council Fathers had intended. So if the rumors of an impending further restriction of the Latin Mass prove to be true, I'd invite those of you who are watching who might not be all that affected by it to ask yourselves, does that make sense? Is the traditional Latin Mass, that form of the liturgy that was practiced for countless generations at a time when we enjoyed much greater unity and harmony, is that really the enemy of unity in the church today? And does suppressing it and those who practice it in the name of unity, does that really make sense? Can I ask you to stick around for one extra minute? Because if you enjoyed that, well, first of all, thanks for watching. But now I could really benefit from your help, which you can do in a couple of ways. You can check out my sponsor, Real Estate for Life, who is a network of pro-family real estate agents that can connect you with one in your area. So if you're looking to buy a home, check them out at realestateforlife.org. And if you can help out directly financially, I tend to trust that most of my regular viewers can afford to drop a $5 tip in my jar once a year. And if they did, I wouldn't have to worry about the financial viability of this effort. So if you do want to support, you can go to brianholdsworth.ca/support or join me in my locals community to get exclusive content and chances to interact with me and members of the like-minded community at brianholdsworth.locals.com.